So, what are you doing? You running for president?
Yes.
Hello, you. Thank you for watching the Upside Down Show. America's favorite hip hop artist is running for president. Check it out.
It was something that God put on my heart back in 2015. A few days before the MTV Awards, it hit me in the shower. And when I first thought of it, I just started like laughing to myself, and it like all this like joy came over my body, just through my soul.
So when you say this, like when you say your calling is to be the leader of the free world, what does that mean to you? Does it mean, do you have a plan that's different than the plans that have been implemented before? Does it mean that you have ideas?
What kind of plan?
Like the plan to be the leader. Like what would you do if you were the leader of the free world? Like what would be different about the way you would handle things? Like if that's your plan, like what is it about that is your calling? Like why would you want to do that? Like what do you want to do differently if you were the leader of the free world?
Well,
Kanye has three distinct qualities. He's devoutly religious, he's very rich, and he's bipolar. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, these three individual qualities are not intrinsically bad in and of themselves. They're neither good nor bad. They just are what they are. They're qualities of people. But the coalescence of these three qualities can be a strange result. So, for instance, just being rich and having the freedom to do whatever it is you want to do, that can lead to a very dangerous, slippery slope for anybody. Be in whatever profession you want. Do whatever it is your mind thinks of at that time. Being devoutly religious. Obviously, it has served a force for good in the world plenty of times throughout history. But then, if it's bolstered by a sense of grandiosity and the notion that God favors you among millions of people to be the leader of the free world, that's creeping into cult-like territory. And that can be dangerous. Should be simple enough. Not to sound like a dick, but that's when you ought to take your meds. If it hits you one day in the shower that you should have a life-changing event and you want to do this new thing for the rest of your life, and this new thing constitutes protecting the lives of 340 million people, that's when you ought to rethink some things. Or at least start taking some meds. Again, I can't say that enough. But Joe asks a really good question that I just played. He, in a nutshell, he asked, what makes your presidency a different presidency? What would make you special? Or what would make Kanye different? And Kanye didn't have a great response. You can watch it yourself if you want. But to paraphrase, he gave some metaphors. He's a captain of a ship. He's the pastor of a hip-hop congregation. He's a visionary. And that God called him to be in that position. I think that was a shower part. The closest thing to an answer he gave, though, was saying that he was empathetic and he listens, which I wouldn't doubt at all. He's very creative. He's a musician. Creativity and musicians, they tend to be high in openness. One of the big 5 personality traits social psychologists have, where when you're high in openness, you tend to be creative. You tend to, be into art or music. So it all connects. I have no doubt he's an empathetic and good listener. And that would be a good attribute for, foreign affairs, this and that. But here's a bump. I'm no fan of most of the politicians that we have right now, but I'm also no fan of the rich and the famous transferring that rich and fame over to a serious facet like politics, where other people's lives are in your hands. He simply is not serious. We should have people that we look at them and say they were made for this role. When you watch a movie, you see an actor that was made for a role once in a while. Heath Ledger was made to be the Joker. We all know it. Well, we should be saying that about our presidential candidates. Here's another example of how serious he takes this whole thing. Check it out.
Throughout history, we've had immense problems because of that, because of military conflicts. How do you think you will approach that? I mean, you will be the commander-in-chief of the greatest army the world has ever known. If you're in that position and we have to deal with some sort of a military action with China, what if China takes over Taiwan? What if they invade Taiwan? What if something happens with Syria? What if something happens with Iran? What if something happens with Russia? And you have to make decisions about military action. Have you thought about this?
Yes, I would. I have to say again, like COVID, I'm a civilian, and people can have all their perspectives that they could have of what they would do in that situation. But I would have the greatest professionals on the planet, the most skilled people that have all the experience that would present the information, and I would make the most sound, rational decisions, and I would follow God's will in my approach to dealing with these other countries.
It's painful. He begins okay. I'll give him that. He gives that stale vanilla response of "I will have the best minds work on it, and I will come to a rational, sound decision." And then, which is it's good, but something you would hear from someone also if they haven't thought of any specifics. It's like who you want in place. Have you thought of who you want in a specific cabinet, for instance? What are your thoughts on the current affairs, for instance? What are your thoughts on the 8 countries we're bombing, of the countries we're in war with? How do you feel about drone strikes? President Obama increased drone strikes. What do you feel about that? Do you have any thoughts on the specifics? It's like when Trump ran. I was wondering the same thing. He didn't have any specifics, and it seems to be the same here. After that, he just kind of dives off the cliff and just go, because then he goes, I will make sure I follow God's will. So the first half is foreign policy experts. Second half is God's will. Foreign policy experts, God's will. Foreign policy experts, God's will. It doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. It kind of is a conflict there, isn't it? Anyway, I don't believe you should bring God into your foreign policy decision. We do have that thing called the separation of church and state for a very good reason. It not only makes me feel uneasy that he's going to bring an outside equation in the mix, not separating his faith from foreign policy experts, but also shows me he hasn't thought squat of this problem. That tells me he can easily be fooled by anybody in Washington with a political agenda on their side. These people play chess. They got 100 moves ahead, and he can easily be fooled if he's not a serious studier of this facet. And it tells me he's not a serious person when it comes to politics. We have got to go back on track of having serious people that are overly qualified to be president. Each candidate's response should leave our jaws dropped wide open. We should be leaving wondering, oh my Lord, I've never thought of that avenue. This guy's a genius. This guy has thought 50 moves ahead. This is brilliant, what I just heard. And that's sort of what disgusts me about this whole thing, even though it's entertaining to talk about Kanye and see these videos. We either have the current corrupt politicians that are in the pockets of Wall Street, pockets of big pharma, big banks, the military-industrial complex, or we have this. We have Kanye West. They're perfectly fine in their own domain, obviously. But because they have the money and the fame, they're able to transfer that over to the most powerful position in the world. To have our lives, our fate in their hands while we fall asleep at night. God help us.